And Jesus took up the question and he said, that's when he tells them this story. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him, beat him up, and fled, leaving him half dead. So picture this road going down to Jerusalem's a really steep road. It goes down about 2,000 feet in elevation, and there's all kinds of rocks and kind of hidden crevices along the way, which make it susceptible for robbers to come along, to hide out, and then attack somebody, which is exactly what happens to this man. He's beat up, left half dead. Verse 31 says a priest happened to be going down the road. So when you hear this in the story, you're like, oh, perfect. Like Leviticus 19:34 says, do whatever you can to help those who are in need. So here's a priest who knows the law. He's going to do it. But the Bible says when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So he ran, kind of like I did when I was walking with that girl through her village. Verse 32, in the same way, a Levite, when he arrived at the place and saw him, passed by on the other side, like literally opposite side, went the other direction. But a Samaritan, so we got to feel this, like Samaritans were hated by Jewish people, and it was mutual. There was just clear tension between Jews and Samaritans. So as soon as Jesus says, but a Samaritan, you can almost picture this expert in the law, his blood starts to boil, like the tension starts to rise. He says the Samaritan on his journey came up to him, and when he saw the man, he had compassion. The Samaritan loved him, and he went over to him. He went to his need and bandaged his wounds, pouring on olive oil and wine. And he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, take care of him. When I come back, I'll reimburse you for whatever extra you spend. And he foots the entire bill. Which of these 3, Jesus asked, do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? Now follow this, because Jesus just totally changed the question. The question is not, now who do I have to love? The question Jesus is asking is, who is the one who is loving? And the expert answers, the one who showed mercy to him. Like he can't even bring himself to say Samaritan. Then Jesus told him, go and do the same. Like the whole point of this story. And if we're not careful, we can miss it. This is not just a story about helping people in need. Yes, we've already seen in the book of Luke, like that's important. Jesus models that for us, calls us to do the same. But this is not just a story about helping people. This is about our need for a new heart. Like this expert in the law was missing the whole point. He needed a new heart. A new heart that, yes, was filled with undivided love for God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, and unselfish love for others. So this is the heart that Jesus is calling this expert to, that he's calling us to. And the reality is that heart can only come by the work of God's grace in us. And this is huge, because when we think about caring for those in need, we need to realize what motivates us to care for those in need is not guilt. Like, I feel bad because I have so much, they have so little, because I'm in this condition, they're in that condition. Like, that's not what motivates us to care for those in need. What motivates us to care for those in need is not guilt. It's the gospel. It's God's grace. It's the reality that once you realize that you are actually the one in need, you don't try to justify yourself like this expert in the law did. You realize before God, I'm separated from God by my sin. I've rebelled against God. I've run away from Him. And by His grace, He has run after me. In love, He has pursued me. He sent His Son to die for me. When that gospel totally transforms your heart, then it results in undivided love for God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and unselfish love for others. You want to love your neighbor in the same way that we're seeing this Samaritan do in this passage. Think about it, what the Samaritan did. Like he took this man who was hurt, he cared for him, bandaged his wounds, took him to an inn, paid for his bill, like did everything possible to provide for him. Have you ever done that for somebody else in need? Like just gone out of your way to make sure they were totally provided for. I'm guessing you have. I'm guessing all of us have done that for somebody, and that somebody is you or me. Like, we care for ourselves like this all the time. We make sure our needs are provided for, and Jesus is saying, this is what it means to love others. Love others like you love yourself. Like, look for opportunities to care for others, provide for others, take responsibility for helping them. Unselfish love for others. This is the fruit of God's love in our lives. So you apply that in a place like this. I think about my friend Aaron, who first brought me into these mountains. Remember, he told me a story about his first time coming up here. He was with like some college buddies, and they were just going to go hiking and trekking, just kind of an adventure trip. But he said at the first kind of stop that they came to, where they were staying the night, he encountered something that caused him to turn right around the next morning. And he didn't finish that trek. Instead, he went down, and the entire course of his life changed. And I asked him, what was it? What happened at that stop? And what he told me is that he ran into some traffickers who basically make a business out of doing what we've already talked about in previous days, finding girls and taking them down into the city to be sold and used and abused. And he ran into these traffickers who just nonchalantly told him what they were doing. And Aaron said he couldn't sleep all night. He was in tears the whole night. And he ended up getting up the next morning, going straight down the mountain and saying, I'm gonna give my life caring for girls like that and families like that and working in these mountains. And that's exactly what he has done. But what's interesting, when I had that conversation with Aaron, and I'd asked him, what caused you to come back down the mountain? He said, your question is a little bit off, because it's not what caused me to come back down the mountain. Aaron said, it's who caused me to come back down the mountain. He said, David, God put a love for the people in these mountains in my heart that I could not shake. And ever since that moment, I have tried to give my life, my family, others who have come alongside to work to show his love in these mountains. I hear that, I read this story, and I think, I want that kind of love to mark my life. Like, don't you? Like, undivided love for God and unselfish love for others. And not just my life, like, this is what should mark us as a church. Like, get through all the stuff, like all the programs and the buildings and the things that we often think of when we think of church, like a community of people who love God with everything they have and who love others like they love themselves, like love others with a commitment to care for and lay down their lives for others in need. What needs to change in your life for that kind of love for God and that kind of love for others to mark your life? What needs to change in your church for that to mark your church? What needs to change even maybe in the group you're walking through this study with? Like, what needs to change in your community together that you might be marked by undivided love for God and unselfish love for others? I pray that God will do a work in my heart and do a work in your heart that will lead to that kind of love in our lives.